Something twisted my brother's head clean off. I found out what it was. I wasn't the one that found Maddie. It was his wife, Elizabeth, back from a night shift at the hospital, eager to shed her scrubs and settle in for a long sleep. Instead, she walked into the bedroom to find Maddie sitting in a chair, his severed head in his lap. I would have preferred not to hear any further details about my brother's body, but when Elizabeth called me on the phone, hysterical, she couldn't help but overshare. Dark bruises covering his arms and legs. There was blood everywhere, soaking through his white t-shirt and striped pajama pants, pooling all around the wicker chair where he sat. The skin of his neck was frayed where it had been ripped apart, almost like a popped balloon. The muscle, too, was stretched and torn, and the vertebrae stuck from the top of his neck hole like a white sleeping worm. Though we hadn't spoken much in the last few years, I was the only family Maddie had left. I caught the next flight to Boston and met up with Elizabeth at her parents' house. She started screaming as soon as she saw me. Or maybe she'd been screaming all day. Maybe I looked too much like my brother for her to handle. After a few hours, she calmed down enough to start saying a few words. I asked her if Maddie had been in any kind of trouble. He'd been reckless in his late teens and early 20s, selling drugs on campus. It was small-time stuff, but he made a few bad enemies, guys that put a real scare into him one night that made him get out of the game altogether. There was nothing like that, she said. He's totally clean. Got a good job clearing out old houses. Like, when someone dies. He gets all the junk out, gets it sorted. Helps sort out the junk from the antiques, takes a commission of the sales. Does he skim? I asked. Maybe someone felt cheated? She shook her head. He buys the stuff he likes. But it's always a fair price. Everybody loved him. Everybody. The cops investigated, of course. But there were no leads. No evidence of a break-in. No one with a grudge. It was like Maddie had twisted his own head off and set it in his lap. One of the detectives mentioned that more than half of murders go unsolved. It seemed this would be one of them. Weeks passed, and I stuck around, trying to help Elizabeth put her life back together. Even after the police were done scouring her place, she refused to go back in. We hired some people to clean up the blood, but they told me there was only so much they could do. The hardwood in the bedroom would never give up that stain. Finally, it fell on me to go into the place and gather a few of Elizabeth's things. They were going to put it up for sale. She was still in pieces, planning to move back in with her parents, probably permanently. I rented a truck and some basic tools, told her I'd get to work. Up until that point, I'd been staying in a cheap Airbnb nearby, but with Maddie's house reopened, I figured I could spend a few nights there while I packed up. When I mentioned the idea, Elizabeth gave me a weird look. You shouldn't stay there, she said. Why not? I asked, but she couldn't come up with a good reason. Of course, the day I got into the place, the first thing I did was head to the bedroom. I guess I just had to see it. The cleaners had clearly scrubbed the hell out of the place, but there was still a nasty stain in the center of the room. The mark was roughly circular and maybe 3 feet across, mostly gray but grew darker at the edges, almost black. Before she sold the house, Elizabeth would have to have the boards replaced, maybe put in carpeting. Something. For a few seconds, I just stood there, looking at the black circle, imagining my brother inside it, permanently. Once I'd spent a few moments staring, I looked up from the stain, really taking the place in for the first time. Elizabeth hadn't been kidding about the antiques. All over the apartment were old hutches and paintings of ships at sea, sets of china and cigar store Indians. My brother had always had an eye for quality. The thing that really stuck with me, though, was a wood carving of an owl, which was standing right in the corner of their old bedroom. The thing was larger than life, coming all the way up to my shoulder, carved all of a single trunk of elm. It was one solid piece, save for a single, amber eye made of glass inlay. The other eye hole was empty, giving the odd impression that the carving was winking at you. The wood had been lacquered maybe a dozen times, leaving it with an uneven plastic sheen. Deep cracks ran through one of the wings and the neck, and the base was discolored from water damage. It certainly didn't look lifelike. Yet, somehow, it felt oddly alive. All afternoon, as I packed boxes of Elizabeth's clothes and shoes, the eye followed me. I'm usually not the kind of guy to get spooked by anything, but I guess after everything that had happened to Maddie, I got kind of on edge. Eventually, I threw an old towel over the carving's head, covering the eye. It felt a little stupid, but it made me feel a little better. A few hours went by, a bunch of boxes got packed, and it started to get dark. My first instinct was to sleep in the living room, away from the stain. And, honestly, away from the owl. I turned off the lights and stretched out on the couch, but it was old and lumpy, impossible to get comfortable. Maddie's mattress, practically brand new, lay untouched in the other room. Finally, after maybe an hour of rolling around, my back aching from the day of hard labor, I grabbed the blanket and headed for Maddie's old room, carefully walking around the black circle. As I tossed the blanket on the bed, I looked in the corner of the room at the owl carving. The towel I'd tossed over its head lay on the ground now. I wondered how it had fallen off. Maybe I'd been careless when I covered the statue in the first place. The eye caught the moonlight, watching. As stupid as it made me feel, I got up and walked over, picking the towel off the floor. As I did, I heard a distinct sound, something like rats' feet skittering inside the owl. I jumped back halfway to the bed, still holding the towel in my hand. For a moment, I stared at the carving, daring it to move, waiting for another sound. Nothing. The whole time, though, even as I was watching it, the amber eye watched me. Slowly, I walked back to the carving and threw the towel over it. Then, I backed across the room to the bed, not quite realizing I was stepping through the black circle on the floor. Finally, I collapsed onto the mattress, curled under the blanket, and fell asleep. I woke to a cracking sound. At first, everything was still. Then, through the moonlit near dark of the room, I watched as the owl statue began to move. First, its left wing pushed out from inside. Then its right. The wood pushed out perhaps 5 inches, revealing something black and skeletal inside. It looked almost like the Transformers Maddie and I had played with as kids, unseen robots pushing out through the plastic panels of a vehicle to reveal their hidden, shiny bones. I lay transfixed as 2 thin, black legs pushed out hidden panels near the owl's base. The black legs, at least, they seemed like legs, couldn't have been much wider than a curtain rod. They pushed all the way down to the floor. Then, the whole carving began to move toward me. The wood swayed on some unseen thing inside it, some too thin creature wearing the wooden owl-like armor. I looked for a way out. I could have jumped through the window, but I was on the 2nd floor. And the thing was moving too fast now anyway. As it reached the bed, it reached out, its thin, black arms growing impossibly long, its hands flattening and growing wide like dinner plates. Then it placed them over my ears and everything went black. I woke to find myself sitting on a wooden chair from the kitchen. The owl must have brought it in while I was passed out. It had placed me inside the black circle. I thought of Maddie, sitting here just like me, not that long ago. I tried to move, but the long black rods that I'd assumed were the owl's legs bound my ankles to the chair. Its hands still gripped my head, their grip only slightly more relaxed than when it had first grasped me. The carving itself stood only a few inches in front of me. Though it fixed me with its amber eye, I could see now that the other eye hole was now open, revealing something black and moving inside. "What are you?" I asked, barely able to speak. I think it laughed. At least, it sounded a little like a laugh. "I'm not quite an owl," it said. Its voice was low, echoing out through the cracks in the owl's wooden shell. "I'm not quite a person either. Some days I feel closer to bird, some days closer to man. But actually, I've been around long before owls ever flew. Of course," it continued, "owls are generally far less interesting than humans. They're basic creatures. Give them a moonlit night and a field full of frightened mice, and they'll be happy. So happy. Every single time. For humans, nothing is ever enough." It clicked its tongue, then got quiet. But there is one area in which owls truly excel, which I have always admired, it said. They are fantastic at turning their heads. So much better than humans. It's an area where it's not even a competition, not even close. As it said this, I felt the pressure from its plate-like hands increase against my temples, and it turned my neck about 90 degrees to the right, not enough to hurt exactly, but it was certainly uncomfortable. I thought of Matty, his head twisted clean off and set carefully in his lap. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because, as I said, humans are interesting. But also frustrating. Not to belabor the comparison to owls, but truly, your eyesight is quite poor. And not just your night vision. Your ability to see yourselves is quite abysmal. Watching you with only one eye, I can see truths about you that you simply cannot face." "What the fuck are you talking about?" I screamed. It held a black finger to its beaks, shushing me. "Please," it said. "If you must scream, wait until you really, really must. Later in the game, it may be unavoidable." "Game?" I whispered. "It's one of my own invention, though it's not too different than some human games. A little bit truth or dare. A little bit mercy. Mostly mercy. The rules aren't complicated. I'll be telling you some truths about your life. Unpleasant truths. Each truth will come with a bit of pain, both mental and physical. When you've had enough, simply speak the word mercy, and your pain will be over. And my head will be in my lap," I said. "Very good," it said. "I knew you were a smart one. In that case, it sounds like no further explanation will be needed. Except that I should add, the result of this exercise will be inevitable. You will eventually beg for mercy. Out of compassion, I'll go ahead and offer you an opportunity to ask for it right now, just to spare yourself the pain ahead." For a moment, I considered the offer. It would be easy to let it simply do what it wanted, to give my head one great, final twist. That would be it. Nothing would hurt after that. But something in me wasn't ready to let go. "No," I said. "Not yet." Deep from within the owl's wooden head, the dark thing looked out at me. Then, it seemed to nod. I felt its impossibly strong hands tighten around my head and began to turn it, perhaps 10 more degrees to the right. It was definitely past the point of uncomfortable now. Along with this physical pain, I'll be stating a truth that carries a similar amount of mental anguish, said the dark, thin thing. I would like to start by saying that you were never a good brother. As a boy, you were the golden child, taking all of your mother's love, allowing a narrative to develop that your brother was the eternal fuck-up. Though you pretended to be kind to him, secretly, deep down you were happy to play the role of the favorite son. Sometimes, it even made you happy to hear your mother ranting at him, refusing him meals as he cried in his room, knowing that his misdeeds only made you look all the better. "No," I said, trying to wriggle my neck free. "Is that what Matty said?" I was a good brother. After Mom used to tear into him, I'd go to his room, bring him snacks when she threw his dinner in the trash. I took care of him. The thing's hands tightened around my head, turning it ever farther. "That happened once or twice," said the thing. "It was little comfort to your brother. More often than not, he went to sleep hungry, well aware that no one loved him, least of all you." I wanted to say more, but I knew it would only bring pain. I held my tongue. "Even in adulthood, you let your brother flounder," it said. "It would have been so easy to help him out with a few $1,000s. You knew he was destitute, selling drugs to make ends meet. He would have blown that money in a week," I said. "Might have gone on a bender, gotten himself killed." "No," it shouted, growing angry at me now. "You were selfish. You wanted to see him twist in the wind. You wanted to be superior." It twisted my neck 5 more degrees. I could feel the skin growing tight as it twisted, the muscles beneath straining against the black hands. "Why are you even here?" it asked. "You never visited when he was alive. Perhaps it actually frustrated you to see him getting his life together. Or is it Elizabeth? You always felt she was too good for Maddie. But you always secretly had a little crush, didn't you? Maybe now that he's dead. No, I said, and hot tears were starting to roll down my face. I was just trying to be a good brother. I swear. Too late, the thing shouted. Too late! It twisted my head again. I felt a wetness on my skin and wondered if I had begun to bleed. Mercy, the thing shouted. Simply say the word and this will all be over. Your brother suffered far less. I'm sorry, Maddie, I said, just talking into the dark. I'm sorry, I did my best. I really did love you, always. Mercy, shouted the thing. Just keep going, I said. It'll be over soon enough. But I'll never ask for it. Never. As I said the words, the first rays of sun cut through the drawn shades. Where the rays struck the thing's hands, there was a smoky smell. Mercy, quick, or it'll only hurt worse, shouted the thing, but there was a note of fear in its tone now. Go ahead then, I said. But it didn't. The sun shone more brightly. Slowly, the pressure on my temples began to ease. The black limbs withdrew. The owl began to back away into its corner. By the time dawn had fully flooded the room, the carving was back in place. That morning, I returned to Elizabeth's parents' house with a few boxes of her things. I must have looked pretty wrecked, because she asked how I was doing, a note of concern in her voice. I'm okay, I said. But I can't stay here anymore. I've got to get home. She nodded, understanding. I've been thinking about it, she said. And I think I can handle the rest. I've been leaning on you too hard. Suddenly, a wave of panic flooded through me. Promise you won't stay there, I said. Promise. I would never, she said. Even when Maddie was alive, I didn't like sleeping there. All those old antiques. I never liked the smell. But Maddie loved them, so. Thank you, I said, trying to stay composed. For being so good to him. She reached out and gave me a big hug. I know you two hadn't hung out much over the last few years, but Maddie always said you were there when he needed him, she said. Now I see what he meant. She looked over at my rental truck. There, in the bed, lay the wooden owl. Is that one of Maddie's? She asked. I was hoping you'd let me have it, I said. One last thing to remember him by. She shrugged. I'd never seen it before. Maybe he'd just gotten it. Yeah, I said. Could be. I said goodbye and got in the truck. And then I drove. I headed out in the city, out where the urban sprawl gave way to some kind of forest, marked with a few sunny meadows. When I was satisfied that I'd reached the middle of nowhere, I stopped. I took the statue from the bed of the truck and dragged it out into a sunny field. All the while, I heard the skittering sound inside. It was getting hot, toward afternoon, and I could tell the heat and light was affecting the thing inside. I knew the wood was full of little cracks. Some of them must have been big enough to let the light through. It's still only noon, I said. Not quite the hottest part of the day. That'll be hours from now, maybe at 3 or 4. I wonder if you'll make it that far. A small shriek emerged from inside the owl. I ignored it. Now, over in the truck, I've got a saw, I continued. I could cut this owl shell of yours right in half and let the light take you. And I will. But first, I'm going to need you to ask for mercy. My friend walked into the water. I never saw him again. Children can often be cruel. A kid picks up a toy, and suddenly her hair is being pulled. She accidentally chose the wrong toy, one which was already claimed by someone else. In a sense, they're very territorial little critters. Some researchers theorize that it's an evolutionary trait, figure out where you belong in the pecking order, early. I don't know exactly how a green toy tractor would be beneficial for one's survival, even if it is a perfect replica of a John Deere. Something about projecting parts of yourself onto inanimate objects and therefore extending your survival to that of the object, I guess. I have a fair amount of experience in this department. I grew up in a world without sound. Even if my condition was invisible to the naked eye, draping me like a ghost made out of thick blankets, the other kids knew. Of course they did. This made me a very easy target. Early, my parents made sure to give me all the tools I would need to take on the world. Sadly, it wasn't really enough. One would think being deaf is a shield from the words of others, but words are never the worst part. Disgusted looks after I miss a cue during PE. Being omitted from band class even though I loved the feeling of guitar strings against my fingertips. Teachers not bothering putting subtitles on during movie time. Those were the worst parts. The day I met Anton was cold. I remember dragging my feet towards school. Brown puddles were scattered on the pavement and my, previously white, shoes soaked up the water a little too well to be made out of leather. As I arrived, the bell rang. Walking slowly, dreading another day of ableism, I noticed a red-haired boy sitting by his lonesome under the bleachers next to the football pitch. Something about him gave me an impression of inherent kindness. I don't know what gave me the courage to actually be the conversational instigator. Probably the freckles. "I'm Sarah." He gently mouthed something back. After that we spent a lot of time together. At the start, we would wait for the other kids to finish playing their games before swooping in afterwards when no one was around. Two silent, stealthy ninjas on their quest for world domination through hopscotch and basketball. Anton picked up sign language quickly and suddenly I had someone who wasn't of my blood to talk to. However, so did my tormentors. Apparently teenagers are cruel, too. And they're more determined. Soon I had heard, pun intended, every insult in the book. But when the words got vile, I would follow the advice Anton gave me. Close your eyes. That's your superpower, he would sign. Now, I think I've made it clear how much this person means to me and why it hurts so fucking much to think about his fate. Fuck. In university we both picked up hiking together. The scenery in Sweden is absolutely breathtaking if you know where to look. Anton's favorite part about nature were the sounds, mine the smells. I remember that morning in vivid detail. We woke up in the same tent just before the gilded rays of the sun pierced the trees of the coppice. Small particles of pine aroma made their way to my nose, yelling at me, no screaming that they were ready to reproduce. Give your phone. I had to repeat the signs 3 times before I got his attention. Fine. Not many gay dudes on Tinder in homophobe city anyways, he replied, referring to the near backwater town where we stayed. We did what we usually did, started wandering the forest aimlessly, enjoying the many impressions the forest offered. Every time a squirrel scuttered up an oak tree or we spotted a plant we'd never seen before, we stopped. I could mistake these small moments for anomalies in the space-time continuum. They seemed to last just a little bit longer than all the unpleasant ones. I was inspecting a particularly cool rock, probably some kind of granite, when I noticed Anton stop moving on the spot. This was indicative of something I could never experience. He was listening for, or to, something. It kind of looked like he was in a trance of some sort. I made it a game to try to guess what bird had him that enchanted. I made a noise to get his attention, but it was futile. In the end, I just walked up right in front of him. Is it a blackbird? It is a violin. At first I thought it was a nickname I didn't recognize for one of the local species, so I made him clarify. No, someone is playing the violin, his hands told me. Eventually, he was moving towards the sound. Or so I assumed. I kept asking him questions, but he wouldn't stop, answering in few words. Magnificent, stunning, almost magical. We entered a small grove. A tiny lake, placed in the middle, was the centerpiece. And on the water, there was a rock. On that rock sat a man, hunched over, completely naked with a violin and bow. There was something off about the way he was positioned, almost like he had been waiting for a long time. As if he, or it, could hear my thoughts, he stood up and straightened himself. I'm not going to lie to you, he was beautiful. Long, blonde hair falling down his chiseled body, which was almost glistening in the sun. I would call him the epitome of beauty, but his smile was crooked. Something wasn't right. Anton had stopped to take in the scene, but was soon on his way towards the man. I began to calmly ask him to stop, walking backwards in front of him. Soon my gestures were getting more and more frantical as I realized he wouldn't slow down. He had stopped responding to me and seemed completely enthralled with the music the man on the lake was playing. Anton was much stronger than me, so I could never physically stop him in normal circumstances if he set his mind to something, but now I couldn't even slow him down. It was as if he turned into a machine, dead set on reaching his destination. I started shouting, I think. He would just glance at me with content eyes. Not even when he set his foot in the water would he flinch. I started screaming at the man to stop the music, but he just looked at me with dead eyes. He wasn't so pretty anymore. A subtle desperation had entered his expression, and as Anton moved further into the pond, he licked his lips. I felt this awful feeling, like that thing carried a hunger so intense it could only be described as starvation. I let go of Anton's arm and started crying. The man would just look at me, then back at my friend, brandishing an awful smile. I didn't stop crying until Anton's shoulders disappeared, then his head. The pond was deeper than I thought possible, and soon I could barely make out the shadow of the submerged Anton. I tried going after him, but he was determined to keep sinking. Soon I got lightheaded and swam back upwards. Before I breached the surface, I looked down, and the last I saw of him was his kind eyes and gentle smile. I feel like he wanted to tell me something. Just close your eyes. I gasped for breath. I started making my way back to the shore. Dripping wet, I sat down in the warm grass. The man on the rock looked at me with a certain confusion. I started screaming at him. I don't think I used any discernible words. Angry sounds. Primal sounds. He just looked at me. The confusion was gone, now he just looked smug. And he started to change. The color of his skin started draining. Soon the perfectly bronzed skin was more akin to the grays of boiled chicken. His limbs started elongating to lengths deeply unnatural. His smile grew from something lightly wicked to something nightmarish. Weirdly, I couldn't see the increments of the transformation, yet he transformed nonetheless. The end result was fucking terrifying. I couldn't move. It stared at me with large, oval black eyes. Earlier I mused on the fact that pleasant moments seemed to last longer than unpleasant ones, but this was different. It felt like forever. Then it slowly raised a thin, sickly arm and waved a slow goodbye. The audacity of this fucking thing. It crouched and started climbing down the rock at the pace of a sloth, never breaking eye contact with me. When it broke the surface of the pond, it did so quietly, I could tell. The water barely moved, and then it was gone. Along with Anton. I had to get this off my chest. And now people will know where I went. Even if that thing still occupies the darkest corners of my nightmares, the forest seems to be calling me. Even though my lungs got damaged to a point of permanent remembrance, I dream of the fluttering water. Even though I can't hear his music, I feel something tugging at my sleeves. I imagine the music was a component of something far more sinister, something ancient. The beauty of it, however, is that I won't have to be wary of every crevice, nook, and cranny on my crusade. I know where it will be. On that same rock, in that same lake, hunching over that same terrible fiddle.